Shalom and welcome to NeshamaCast, exploring Jewish spiritual care today, brought to you by Neshama, Association of Jewish Chaplains. I'm your host, Rabbi Ed Bernstein. We are recording on Wednesday, October 22nd, in the midst of the nationally recognized Spiritual Care Week, honoring the service of chaplains. We in NAJC celebrate all of our members during Spiritual Care Week and all the time. Listeners to NeshamaCast have been introduced to Jewish chaplains from many different modes of service, such as senior living facility chaplains, prison and jail chaplains, chaplaincy researchers, chaplains to people in recovery, and many others. In the talented pool of NAJC chaplains, many of our members are leaders not only in Jewish chaplaincy, but also in the broader field of spiritual care for all. On this program, we will meet 3 chaplains who currently serve or have recently served as leaders or managers of departments of spiritual care in major hospitals. In this light, our guests will discuss their experiences leading teams of chaplains, their serving Jewish constituents, and their managing systems that serve the broader population. Let me introduce our panel. Rabbi Freda Cohen recently retired after a distinguished tenure as Director of Pastoral Care and Education at White Plains Hospital in White Plains, New York. She has rabbinic ordination from the Jewish Theological Seminary and is a Board Certified Chaplain. I am proud to serve on the NAJC Social Media Committee with Freda, and she will moderate our discussion. Chaplain Mark Daniels is a board-certified chaplain who serves as the manager of spiritual services at the Cohen Children's Medical Center of New Hyde Park, New York, which is part of the Northwell Health system. Chaplain Daniels has been an active Reform Jew his whole life. I have the honor of serving with Mark on the board of NAJC. Rabbi Simcha Silverman is also in the Northwell Health system and serves as Director of Chaplaincy Services at Northwell Health Lenox Hill Hospital in Brooklyn, New York, and he is a board-certified chaplain. In addition to his hospital responsibilities, Rabbi Silverman serves as the rabbi of Congregation Eitz Chaim of Flatbush, a synagogue in Brooklyn, New York, that has just marked its centennial anniversary. While all of our guests are based in the New York metropolitan area, I'm pleased that they represent the Jewish denominational diversity of NAJC, coming from conservative, Reform, and Orthodox Jewish streams. And I thank them for their participation and collegiality. I'm now going to turn it over to Rabbi Freda Cohen to moderate the discussion. Freda, take it away.
Thank you, Ed. And I do want to thank Simcha and Mark for participating with me in this discussion. I noted before that we are 3 New Yorkers, so we're going to try to slow down our pace of speaking. And so I want to start with a thought that while Jewish chaplains have made great strides in terms of employment at hospitals, I personally am not aware of many Jewish directors or managers. I am hoping that with this podcast, we can provide information to and strategies for our colleagues to advance in their fields if they wish. So my first question to each of you is how you became a leader of your chaplaincy department. Were you promoted from within? And what was your impetus to move to administration?
I guess I'll jump in there. I was promoted within. We had gone through really the beginning of the pandemic. A woman who had been the director of our hospital program was actually cut for budgetary reasons and everything else that was going on in the pandemic. And I was asked at first to be the lead chaplain, and then from lead chaplain, they wound up promoting me to manager. Reasonably, at the time, there were three of us. There's still three of us now, but we ran two of us for a while. I accepted the manager's position and the lead position with the understanding that I did not want a full-time administrative job. My joy is being on the units, being on the floors. I do an awful lot of work in the emergency room and staff support. You couldn't pay me enough money to just sit behind the computer all day and manage what's going on. I'm very happy that I didn't have to just box myself into a corner. It's been an interesting ride. It goes up and down. I myself am looking to transition towards semi-retirement, so I'm in the process of trying to work with my team to see who may or may not be able to fulfill the spot, hoping to be able to do it from within. And in today's crazy society, you never know what's going on with budgets and everything else, which is the biggest nemesis. So we'll see what happens, and hopefully we'll be able to maintain the strength that we have, because it's an unbelievably strong need. People are not really aware of how important chaplains are. Just a short, funny story that hopefully doesn't hit the cutting room floor. But years ago, my wife was hospitalized before I went into chaplaincy. A chaplain came to visit her, happened to have been a volunteer. And, she said, I didn't know what to do with him. So I asked him, to fluff up my pillow and change the TV channel for me. She now kind of realizes we do a heck of a lot more than that. I think the piece that I like about it, and to me that it's important, is the humane connection between people. And that's the key.
Well, thank you, Mark. Firstly, it's always a pleasure to listen to you and to your insights. And thank you, Fredo, for facilitating, and the NAJC for hosting this podcast and giving me the opportunity to participate. I also was promoted within. I actually came to Lenox Hill Hospital first as just a volunteer. I covered a little bit for the existing staff chaplain in the department, looking for a position. He had a position that he was hoping for that opened up out of the health system, and I was hired to fill that position of staff chaplain. It wasn't very long after I came that my director left the health system, moved out of state. He went on to a different position. And but without any formal promotion to a leadership role, it was a very small department. I was full-time, and so I picked up some of the responsibilities. Sometime later, the then director of patient experience, and I'm full of gratitude to our current patient experience department, of which our department of chaplaincy falls under, approached me and offered me the position of manager, almost saying, you're doing a lot of it now anyway, and it would work out well for everybody. So I began in that position. And then sometime after that, a brief couple of years perhaps, I moved into the position of director of the department and took over the department. So really, really grew organically for me in such a way. I, like Mark said as well, don't see my position as completely administrative, and also can't see myself being fully administrative. First of all, I would think that a good administrator does need some ongoing bedside work just to keep on top of their game and keep abreast of what's happening and a finger on the pulse. And I don't know that in the chaplaincy world that could be recreated by sitting in an office. But also, my passion is the bedside. My passion is staff support, family support, being with patients, etc. I see a lot of the administrative work as leverage to be able to do that and to allow my team members to do it better. So it's a healthy blend. It's a healthy mix. I'm very thrilled and happy in the position that I'm in. How about you, Freda? You came to this in what way? Be a director at your hospital.
Well, I was a staff chaplain for 6 years, and we were a very tiny department. We were 2 staff chaplains and our director. We had many, many volunteers and interns. And he was weighing retirement for quite a while. And then finally he retired, and we both, my colleague and I, enjoyed so much working under him. And we did so much work because quite honestly, as he was transitioning out, he was spending less and less time at the office, which is not atypical. And so neither one of us wanted to work for anyone else. That really was my impetus, because when I received the job at White Plains Hospital, it was my dream job. It was the job that I can only imagine getting when I was in rabbinical school. And so I felt so blessed to have that position. I really, frankly, didn't want to work for anyone else. I was very spoiled. We had a wonderful director. And so I asked my colleague, who had more seniority than I did she want to be the director? And she said, no way. And so I said, well, do you mind if I go for it? And she said, no, I would love for you to do it. I said, what about if we're co-directors? She said, well, I would consider that, but they did not. The administration did not, and it would have been a terrible idea. But they put me through the ringer. I was not a shoo-in for the position. There was no one else from inside the organization, but they did want to post the job. I don't know if, they didn't have confidence in my administrative abilities, because I hadn't really proven them while I was a staff chaplain, or, not to their faces anyway. We did a lot of behind the scenes administration, but ultimately I got the position, and I found it to be the most wonderful professional experience of my life, because it exercised both my right brain and left brain side. In that I'm very nerdy with numbers and I love matrix. I don't like being held to matrix, but I do like playing with matrix and so I matrices. So I did do that. I also insisted that I visit with patients. So my director had seen 32 patients in a year, and I had seen 1,500 my first year as director, which I think you absolutely can do, and I would say you have to define your directorship, and you have to have confidence that your instincts are good. So I want to ask a question of practicality, of tachlis. How large is your department, and how do you assign visits? I'll start with Simcha.
We're a department of 5 chaplains. That's including some that are at a satellite hospital to Lenox Hill. We're 5 chaplains, Eucharistic ministers, Bikur Cholim volunteers, in addition to that. And we assign, so on a typical day, there could be 3 or 4 chaplains at the hospital, depending on the day of the week. Visits are assigned. We try what we call for every ICU every day. So the ICUs are assigned to chaplains. The next step to that is a request with any religious affiliation, even if the request doesn't have a religious need to it. So say there's a referral for a patient, and in the computer that patient is listed as Catholic. Assuming logistics work out, then our priest will see that patient regardless of which floor or unit they're on. Then there are further steps. So we attend palliative rounds 3 times a week. At those palliative rounds, there are referrals that are picked up. So sometimes it's the chaplain that, got that referral, and it just makes sense for it to be that chaplain to see the patient. We go to some codes, and that's, by a pager. So that will often be the chaplain who's holding the pager that day, and that we rotate through the department. So in summary, we are assigned to specific floors, but I don't think a day goes by that any of us are only on those floors. The ICUs are more defined. The outlier of that would be either somebody that was following a patient from before that was then upgraded to the ICU, or a religious affiliation or specific religious need. That's how our days are pretty much structured.
Thank you, Simcha. Mark?
Our day doesn't run grossly different than yours. There are 3 of us, all full-time. I work Monday through Friday, pretty much from 8 to 5. One of my chaplains does pretty much the same schedule with 1 or 2 days variance. And my 3rd chaplain works 2 long days on Saturday and Sunday. So we have coverage 7 days a week. And he comes in on Tuesday and Thursday to interface with us. The 2 daytime chaplains are assigned specifically to units. Let me backtrack, just a reminder, we're a pediatric hospital. So most of my interactions because the nature of the patient is really with the family as opposed to with the patient. I'm pretty good, but I can't get a 2-month-old to talk to me. So something we can't successfully get done. So it sometimes it's even in conversation. People have to think about for a second, is he talking about the kid or is he talking about the mom? And this is the nature of where we are. The culture of our hospital is just so totally different than any of the adult hospitals I've ever worked in, which is something I really like about it. So we follow by unit. Since we have a total of 175-ish cribs/beds. It's not a large hospital by any means. We normally have 5 to 10 patients who identify as being Jewish. So it's pretty easy for me to make sure that I see any and all of them. We do try to see the patients on a regular basis. I kind of pride myself in checking in with them on a daily basis as opposed to anything else. If one of my other guys handles the oncology unit, so if one of the patients in the oncology unit is upgraded to intensive care, which is where I cover, he will follow that patient. If you've already established a relationship with somebody, why recreate the wheel and try and create that barrier, and also give them, you don't want to avoid giving them that sense of desertion when, just because I was on floor 3, now I'm on floor 4, you won't talk to me. So we try to connect better that way. My other 2 chaplains are Christian, so they will take care of most everything. On occasion, if we need to bring in an imam or a Hindu priest, or most of the time, my other 2 guys will be able to handle whatever sacraments are necessary, but sometimes Catholic parents will specifically ask for a Catholic priest. And we have a sister hospital that we're attached to, and one of the priests will come over upon request and take care of those things. So that's kind of how we juggle around and move it through, and it works well for us. How did it work for you, Brett?
Well, we started with 3 full-time chaplains and volunteers. When my director left and I became the director, we then had another full-time position available. And if I recall correctly, I believe what we did was we divided that position and hired 2 part-time people to come in. And this was tragic, actually, one of our chaplains died right after COVID, and it just tore us apart. This was someone who was so integral to the department. She was a youngish woman. She died of cancer, and it just knocked the wind out of all of us. We had become close. You work in a small office. And so senior leadership came to us and said, what can we do for you? We'll do anything for you. And so I took this as an opportunity to say, we really need more physicians. We need more staff. We have a priest who is here as a volunteer, and we have another chaplain who is here as a volunteer. I would like to hire them. And they did. And so we wound up growing our department. It was a little bit opportunistic, but honestly, we needed the chaplains. And so I was happy to do it. And I would say that we do assign differently in that we assign according to religion, which I know goes against all CPE dogma. But what we have found is that patients feel more comfortable with chaplains of their own faith, not necessarily their home clergy. And so that is what we've tried to do, but we are all very comfortable ministering to people of other faiths.
I would just add one thing to what I had said prior. I think that exists in our hospital to a great degree as well. There are assignments, certainly, but there's no question that, our Catholic priest picks up the Catholic list every morning, as I do for the Jewish list. And whether it's on my unit or not, those are patients that we would try to follow. So I think you're correct that feeling is across boards in many hospital settings. And so thank you for that.
So both of you stated that you were promoted from within. I want to know how that changed, if it did, your relationship with your colleagues? And how did you feel in terms of now being their boss?
Silke intimately knows my whole team, so he knows exactly who I'm talking about and what I'm saying here. I am pretty fortunate that it did not have a negative impact, and it could have. There is a younger man than me. He's basically my son's age, who was actually in the department about a year and a half or so longer than I. And I was a little concerned when our department actually, although corporately we report to patient experience within the hospital, we report to one of the vice presidents of the hospital. And he had called me in to let me know that my previous boss was let go that day, and this was the game plan. And one of the questions I had, well, how's Adrian going to feel about that? And I said, well, Adrian's being spoken to by Human Resources at the time, and they were going to let him know. And actually, he was very gracious and very understanding. I mentioned he's my son's age. He kind of sees me as a father figure and as a mentor. So it actually worked out very well for us. And he's, the person that I'm trying to groom into my desired retirement or a step back. And he's the one that's trying to talk me out of, no, you got another 20 years in you. And I kept saying, I don't have another 20 years in me. It's not going to happen. There are other things in life I want to do. So I need to lay back a little bit. But it could have been a very challenging and very negative kind of situation. And fortunately, it was quite good, both with him and with the other department heads. It kind of worked out fairly well.
And you, Simcha?
Yeah, thank you, Mark, for sharing that. And I very much appreciate this question because while I gave it thought in the past, I'm not sure I really ever articulated an answer to that question. So when I came to Lenox Hill, at first, like I mentioned before, I came in as a volunteer, then I began covering for the staff chaplain and then I was hired, full time. So at that point, there wasn't a director, there was an interim director who interviewed me. And I then became, a chaplain in the department, and then a director joined the team from the outside. And that director left, as I mentioned, and I became the manager of this other chaplain. So I actually became the manager of the chaplain that interviewed me for my own position, which is an interesting dynamic. Thinking about it now and thinking out loud, I put words to it. I remember speaking to him about it. Well, maybe in a more formal discussion. And then from then on, just sort of like joking about it back and forth. He had no interest. He was an amazing chaplain, a blessed memory. He passed away a few years ago, an excellent chaplain and really, really good at what he did, but did not have interest in growing past what he was doing. He didn't work 5 days a week. He had an extensive travel schedule. And so he was great at the bedside, excellent at the meetings that he was part of. He was probably our lead, palliative care chaplain at that point. But it was, in hindsight, a healthy dynamic. He was a dear friend of mine, literally until his passing. Thank God it worked out well. And as you phrased the question, I was thinking that it really could have worked not very well. It's an interesting dynamic, but it worked very, very well. And so thank you for that. And by you, Freda, it must have been interesting as well because you even offered to share the directorship with your co-chaplain. So tell us a little bit about by you.
Yeah, like your colleague, she had absolutely no interest in being a sole director. And so that made it a little bit easier. We were still very close friends and we maintained our friendship. I found it difficult when I had to write evaluations for two reasons. One is I had developed a relationship with most of the staff, a close relationship. And two, that their salaries and their raises depended on their evaluations. So that was a little bit difficult for me. And I really did have to separate myself as their friend from being an administrator and thinking what was appropriate for the department. So I was honest about it, but gentle, I would say. And I wanted to just respond to Mark and say, Mark, I think it is a very good idea for you to start grooming someone. And that is something that I did because honestly, I didn't think I was going to retire as early as I did. That was for family reasons. I had to help my husband, who is ill. And for me, it was a little premature, but the fact that I knew that was the right choice. So it made it much easier for me. And as that was happening, I made sure that we had someone who was taking charge. He would take charge when I would be on vacation. He would be in charge if I was out of the office. He also had a managerial position in a former life. He was an elementary school principal. So it was easy for him to step up and manage. So it became a very, very organic situation. And when I retired, his moving into my position was much easier. It was almost a fait accompli because he had served as interim director when I was away for about 3 months. So I do think it's very important for anyone who is in a leadership administrative role to make sure there is an obvious line of succession, if you can.
I thank you for that advice and support. And to me, it's one of the pieces is not only I, but my entire team has worked so hard to get our department where it's at that for lack of transition, I wouldn't want to see it fall apart. It would be a shame for all the efforts that all of us have put in. It's not an ego statement because the other guys have worked as hard as I have.
And Mark, I think, the person that you're thinking of as a successor would be amazing, but I'd have to agree with him that 20 more years.
Thanks a lot.
20 more years. Don't go anywhere yet, Mark.
So this is a question that is not pertinent simply for us as managers, but pertinent for all chaplains, really, which is what is it like providing ministry for people of all faiths or of no faith in your setting?
I'll jump in, and Mark, if you'd like to jump in, I'll go right after that. There's certainly times where people may say to me, oh, I didn't know that patient was Jewish. And sometimes I'll just respond, no, they're not. And so there are times where, even to staff, that could be something that's unique, that for sure does take place. That's certainly something that happens. That's a New York City type of thing where people, see communities in some ways, and where exposure to a Jewish community is strong, and where people know that there are, Jewish supportive resources. So put me into that lane. And we also have a very robust priest, etc. But I reflect on two quite recent incidents. And one was with a Muslim family. And unfortunately, by the time I saw the patient was no longer responsive. And she actually died the morning after this encounter that I'll mention. So it was mostly with the daughter of the patient. And sometimes my approach is where there's a request for a specific member of clergy of a different faith, and I know I'm going into that room not representing that faith. I go in specifically as I'm the director of the department, and I want to let you know we're trying to get the imam, the Greek Orthodox priest, or whatever it may be, and this is where we're up to with it. I put in a phone call. I hope to get a call back. We work often with this church, and they're usually responsive. Or I'm going in to apologize that, we've tried, or this isn't a faith tradition that we have a relationship with. And not so much, but what else can I do for you? But these are maybe the resources. So say it would be a Muslim patient. I would say, we weren't able to get an imam. I do have access to an imam over the phone, or I can bring a prayer rug if that was what you were seeking. So this was with a daughter of a patient, very, very strong Muslim faith. And so I went in with that approach. We spent probably 25 to 30 minutes together. It was an extremely meaningful visit for me, and the feedback from her was quite similar. And everything from speaking about the relationship of a mother to a daughter, an only child losing a mom, a suddenness of onset of a progression of illness. Her profession allowed her to understand the trajectory of this illness. And we spoke about that, and, where her role vis-a-vis her relationship with her father may be somewhat different post the demise of her mother. A very, very meaningful visit. And so that certainly comes to mind. mind. She had actually said it would be okay if the email first comes tomorrow. I said back, I still would like to try to get him this evening. I think that would be better. And in hindsight, that was a blessing because her mom passed away the next morning. So that was a very meaningful encounter. And then quite recently also, I saw a person who doesn't identify with any specific faith. He had recently lost a sister. I knew that before I went into the room, which just highlights as a sidebar. Sometimes what the person is in the hospital for is not what their greatest worry is in any which way. And I think we swim in a unique lane that allows us to identify that and support that. So I knew he had recently lost a sister when I met him. I didn't know that he had lost another sister about 3 weeks prior. And also just a very meaningful encounter. Belief in God came up. Faith in specific tradition was not part of the visit. He clearly knows, I'm Jewish and things of that nature, but the visit was very, very meaningful. And I think overall, that's the overarching approach. I very, very seldom, encounter something other than receptiveness. If this was the topic of tonight's discussion, the only topic, I think we could go on and with encounter and story, but those were just the two that came to mind. And Mark, I'd pass it to you.
As I've mentioned in previous meetings with Simca, I'm a tremendous fan of Martin Buber. Buber has answered a lot of the questions that I've raised and given me some insight into understanding what was going on. So I will very often throw out Buber quotes. And I'm going to just say to you, one of the things that he said was, God made so many different kinds of people. Why would God allow only one way to worship? I find that very powerful, especially as a multi-faith chaplain who happens to be Jewish. It gives me the opportunity to meet people where they're at. I kind of pride myself in that my goal and my whole team's goal is to connect with our patients via humanity, not necessarily via any other avenue. As a Jewish chaplain, or as a Jew, I should say, my whole knowledge of prayer is from my Judaism. So one of the things that I do an awful lot is I call it wordsmithing. Every prayer that I offer, every piece that I give to parents to try and give them some comfort and understanding is all based upon Jewish prayer that I know. Now, obviously, with a non-Jewish family, I'm not going to use any Hebrew because it's not going to be comforting to them. I've offered prayer, even end-of-life prayer, and I had one Italian family, and I offered basically a Malay in English, and they said, that's a beautiful prayer. I'd never heard it before. And then they crossed themselves, and I kind of snickered to myself. I said, obviously, I've met their spiritual need. I may not have used words that they're used to hearing, but that's not important. What's important is that I was able to meet them in their moment of need in a way that was true to me and true to them. And I'm very proud of being a Jew. I have no problem telling somebody that I'm Jewish. If they ask, I tell them straight out. Also, as simply we try to find somebody of their exact denomination if we can, but sometimes we don't have time to do it. And sometimes I've already established a relationship with them. Just one fast anecdote. I was just talking to somebody the other day, probably about a year and a half ago. A 9-year-old boy was suffering from a brain tumor and was losing his battle. And I had spent maybe 2 months with the family. And we had a good working relationship going. And at one point, the mom said to me, she said, I hope I'm not offending you, but could you arrange for a priest to give Catholic last rites? And I said to her, I said, don't be ridiculous. You're not offending me at all. I want to do what you're comfortable with. And I arranged with one of the priests who I like to work with to come in. And I said, if you don't mind, I'll be there and I'll offer some of my own prayer. And she said, no, that's great. You've been fine and very supportive of us. And the father offered the full last rites and I offered my equivalent, if you will. And we walked out of the room and the priest turned to me and he said, you just said basically the same thing that I said. And I said to him, I'm not going to use his name, you learned it from us. And he kind of laughed. He said, yeah, you're right. Okay. I think the important piece is that regardless of what our religion is or a patient's religion is, people are looking for comfort. They're looking for an understanding of why and why we really, I often tell people my magic wand is broken and my crystal ball is cracked. I can't give you those answers, but I can give you some kind of rationale, what that might make you feel less bad in the situation that you're in. Any little tricks you got for us, Freda?
Well, I could tell you two stories. One is a situation where we had a priest who was a patient and he was dying. And so it got around the Catholic circles in the church, and the cardinal actually came in. So I received a call from my supervisor telling me that the cardinal was coming. And every senior leader was so nervous, you know. So I said, okay, I'll go up and I'll meet him. And I invited my staff because I thought it would be extraordinary to meet him. And we went up to the ICU. And he went in and he said his prayers. And then I said to him, Your Eminence, there is a Catholic patient who was 2 doors down. Would you mind going and saying a prayer? And he said, no, of course. So, and you know, he's huge. And he was dressed in his regalia, and he has a very striking presence. Anyway, we walked down the 2 halls and he put his arm around me. You know, he is so tall, I'm small. He puts his arm around me and I looked at him and I said, Your Eminence, do you realize we're the only 2 people in the hospital wearing yarmulkes? And actually, I developed a very good relationship with his secretary. And so when I had very, very urgent matters, or if I had questions that I was uncertain of regarding Catholic protocol, especially when it came to COVID, I would call his secretary directly, and he is a priest, so that was very helpful. The other thing is that I found that being clergy was very helpful when it came to welcoming new staff, and White Plains Hospital made an effort to help give employment to newly resettled immigrants, refugees. So I work under HR. That's my department, which actually has worked out quite well for us. There was a question about this one woman who was Muslim, and the staff didn't really understand what her need was. And she could not work in the food service because she might touch pork, and she couldn't work in transport because she didn't want to see the nakedness of a man. And it was a little strange for some of the people. I said, you know what, let me meet with her. And she felt so comfortable with me as clergy, even though we were 2 different religions. As a group, the new refugees were feeling that they had some religious needs that went unfilled. For instance, during Ramadan, they weren't given time to pray, or they felt funny asking for it. You know, that it wasn't even that the hospital wouldn't do it. They were just concerned. And also people very kindly would offer them water. And, you know, how many times can you explain, no, I can't drink water either. So we actually formed an affinity group with them. And we wound up putting together a Juma service for the group, which is the Friday afternoon services. So we formed such a tight bond with the Muslim staff, both with the new staff and with other staff who'd been there for a while. And they were so grateful. And we were so grateful to have their friendship and support. So switching gears a little bit and speaking about Jewish needs, what have been the blessings and challenges that you have had in advocating for Jewish needs in your institution?
The biggest piece that I'm proud of is our ability to educate the staff. We had a major problem with some of the elevators not being able to be channeled into Shabbat mode. And I was working with our communications director because an elevator bank was out and we had to switch the signage and the elevator that was going to be in the Shabbat mode. And the staff was asking, what's the big deal? What does it mean? I was able to explain the rationales behind it and the halakha or the Jewish law behind it for everyone to be able to understand what's going on. It actually led to explaining to our director of communication, who finally listened and said, wow, I never knew that component of it, that you push a button and it's calling for electricity. Is this the modern day interpretation of creating a fire during time when you're not supposed to be engaged in work? And the pieces started to make sense, to the point that we started to do lunch and learns. And the first one was on Judaism 101, which was open to the entire staff. And a couple of the physicians in the building joined me, and we each gave little pieces as to, for people to understand, why, especially with our Hasidic group, we're in New York City. There's a large Hasidic population that dresses a lot different than conventional dressing, and tried to explain why and give them an understanding. Even the rationale, a nurse once said to me, she said, okay, I understand they're not supposed to ask you to do something on the Sabbath, but why is it okay if they do it beforehand? It was just a teaching process, and it was like eye-opening for our non-Jewish staff who was unaware of some of the nuances of why the rules are the way the rules are. So it was a great opportunity. I know this sounds totally strange, but it took me about 2 years of coercion. And as I said, this was outside parameters of my personal needs. I've been a Reformed Jew my entire life. Simcha and I have had many conversations about why he does what he does and why I do what I do. And we get to walk down the street hand in hand and agreeing to disagree. And that's the beauty of chaplaincy. It's the beauty of people who are educated into what's going on, that we actually were able to get one of the public bathrooms to be totally Shabbos friendly. Sounds like a very minor kind of thing, but it was a major piece. And it's just a matter of manual dispensers and Z-fold paper, et cetera, et cetera. People are thrilled with it. We're trying to get it at the adult hospital now, and that's going to be another 2-3 year discussion, but we'll persevere and we will win. Those are the pieces, something that we've done for the betterment of Jewish personnel and Jewish families that are in the hospital.
Thank you, Mark, for that. It's really a blessing, and I give credit to the hospital employees from administration and the trickle down to really every position. I'm having a hard time thinking of a department or service that isn't touched in some way at some point during the year by a specific Jewish need. We, like Mark, run the gamut of the Jewish population in our hospital. There really isn't a department that I could think of that isn't touched by it in some ways. And I often think that I would want to put out a mini video taking the quote unquote most observant, if you may, or highest needs of observance. And from their perspective, what do they experience coming into a hospital? So it's really credit to the hospital administration and to every team member that participates in that. Yes, we cultivate relationships. Yes, we're supportive. Yes, we don't come across as demanding. Yes, we show our appreciation. Yes, we communicate. So in this last month, every 2 days, there was another set of what the next holiday brings and what its needs are. I don't even want to use the word accommodation. The respect, the support is really, really incredible. If I may, I'll give 2 quick examples. I know we're against the clock. 6 weeks ago or so, I met with somebody from engineering just to give the date of when the sukkah should go up. And he looked at the calendar and he realized when Rosh Hashanah is. And he said, let me get it up before then in case somebody needs to use it on that holiday. Now, we don't use the sukkah on Rosh Hashanah, but just that wanting to just make sure that if there's a need, it's being met and it's being supported and being made available for people is really tremendous. I remember I got a text from somebody in leadership in environmental a couple of years ago, that they were replacing the Purell dispensers. And his text was, I wasn't at that meeting. He said, but I made sure that at point A and outside the Bikur Cholim room and on this floor and that floor, that we leave a manual Purell dispenser so that could be used on the Sabbath and the holiday. I never even mentioned that to them. And it was just almost a next step or an extrapolation of an understanding of some of the laws.
But you've probably taught it to them, so they understood it.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yes, yes. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I hope that we set the stage for that infrastructure, but the credit is to them. The challenge I sometimes find is the opposite. As the director of the department, and also obviously as a rabbi, I want to make sure that although the Jewish needs and holiday needs, there are many more needs than what other faith traditions mandate. Am I making sure to be just as attentive to those other specific religious needs? I'm a Jewish director. I'm a rabbi. I need to advocate and make sure that the Jewish holiday needs, the Jewish kosher needs, the Jewish end of life needs, the Jewish care and advanced illness, all of those things play a role. But am I making sure that that same attention and coverage is given to other faiths? So the challenge isn't so much in making sure that the Jewish infrastructure is in place, but in asserting and making sure that I'm doing the same whatever tradition presents itself. How about by you, Freda? How is it a challenge, a blessing for you?
I believe the staff is very respectful of Jewish patients and of our department generally and of me. And so often I would give counsel to staff. I always said, call me Freda, and they would call me Rabbi. Like there was a certain amount of respect that they showed. And I think that was simply being menschlichkeit. And I will translate. I'll try to translate, being a person, being just a real person. I will say that my one failure, and next we're going to talk about accomplishments and I'll talk about that. But my one failure was not being able to get a hospitality room in the hospital, but the hospital is now growing and my successor has promised me that that is number one on the list. So I always felt badly about that and a little embarrassed, actually. Okay, next question. What do you consider to be your major accomplishments so far?
I think our major accomplishment is comfort in knowing that the parents and the staff know that we're available and that we're there. I remember when I first started about 10 years ago, and one of my main units was the emergency room. As you might have guessed, I'm a little older than most of the nurses. They're usually my children and grandchildren's age. And I used to dress in a jacket and tie, and nobody would talk to me for about 2 or 3 weeks because they just assumed that I was in the health department and I was, the hand washing inspector. They were all afraid of me. And I've told new people that have come along and volunteers, and I've done some speaking at CPE programs. It takes 4 to 6 months for staff to be acclimated to your being around, and you're not going to get referrals from staff, and they're not going to reach out to you until they see your presence and your availability to them and to the patients. I'm thrilled that on all of our units, our staff knows the 3 of our names. They have no problem punching us in the arm or grabbing us, hello, and to see and there. And to me, that's a major accomplishment of our department, that we're recognized for the good that we try to do.
Thank you. Simcha?
Maybe somewhat along the lines of what Mark was saying. I think our greatest accomplishment is that we've created an environment or an atmosphere where the provision of spiritual support, help with religious needs, and emotional support is part and parcel of what our patients, their families, and our staff members receive. I think everything that we do is in support of that. But that ability where chaplaincy, and I can't say this is always, but this is the setting, this is the infrastructure, isn't an afterthought. It's part and parcel of the care. It's expected. A nurse manager just recently said to a team member, to one of my chaplains and the team, thanks so much for coming to all the rapid responses. It makes a difference. So it's expected. It's understood. That's, I think, the greatest accomplishment. And like I said a moment ago, I think any point along that is there to just support that end goal. And Freda, reflecting on your years in your work, what would you say?
And so, as I said, my department, the whole hospital is very goal driven. And so are more practical. Ironically, I feel that my most important accomplishment was convincing the administration to hire a Catholic priest to be on our staff, because there were so many requests for priests and we were assigned a couple of priests from the archdiocese, but it was always difficult to get them because they were so busy. And it put a lot of stress on us, a lot of stress on the nurses. The one thing that clinical staff would complain about was that we couldn't provide the priest. And so I worked very hard to convince management that we needed a priest, and we did hire a priest, and he is still on staff, and we all love him dearly. He is part of the hospital, as opposed to being from the rectory and coming in. So that was one. The second, which I'm also very proud of, is that we have a small meditation room, and we would do Shabbat services, we would do Mass, we would do all kinds of services, and now they're doing the Juma service. And I convinced the hospital to put in a system by which we could broadcast our services. Because I was noticing that when I did Shabbat services on Friday afternoon, Kabbalat Shabbat, maybe I'd have one or two people come, but everyone, was either too tired, too sick with their family. If it was family, they wanted to be with their family. And so this has been a godsend. And every single Friday, for instance, we will distribute a card along with challah and juice that says there is a service on your television station on channel 86, and you are welcome in short, and it's described. So that was a wonderful thing. And all of the chaplains use that for their particular services. We did a model Seder. Third was we had an initiative which we called Care Code, which was modeled on Code Lavender, but is stronger, that we will regularly go up to a department every month to provide goodies and water and debriefing. We started with 9 units and 6 volunteers. And when I 6 volunteers, I mean 6 staff members who volunteered their time to do it. So it was holistic nursing and caregiver support and me, and we wound up branding it. We actually have a registered trademark for it, but that was something that we pushed. I do believe that as director, you have to push your department, brand your initiatives. You can't be modest. It's hard because we're all such modest people. I say modestly, but we typically do not promote ourselves. And so it's hard for me to promote myself, but it's not hard for me to promote my department. And the last thing, which I was very proud of, was we hosted a brand rounds where we got outside clergy to come in. We invited them to talk about the specific religious needs of their constituents. So those were 4 things. So we are really coming towards the end. We have so much to discuss. Oh my goodness. But I want to be respectful of your time. I'm going to ask each of you to share a bit of Torah or wisdom from Jewish tradition that guides and inspires you.
There are prayers that come to mind that I have somewhat of a different approach to when I say them individually as prayers in my own life, whether in congregation or my own, and that helps guide some of the work that I do and hopefully creates meaning with some of the interactions. And, one that comes to mind is there's a traditional blessing which a person says each time that they use the bathroom. And in that blessing called the Asher Yatzar, which translates as the one who created, or praise to the one who created, we really recognize the magnificence of the body and all the intricacies that go into a functioning body. And if, God forbid, one thing were not to work appropriately, what would happen? And if something were to open when it should be closed, and something to be closed when it should be open. And really, those of us who are blessed to work in healthcare and in the setting that we are as chaplains, we're mindful and cognizant of that in any patient encounter. What brought this patient to the hospital is that something in their body didn't go as planned. So there are 3 words in that specific prayer, which some have the custom to say and some don't have the custom to say. And those three words are afilu sha'a achat, even for one moment, in which we recognize that even if something were to go wrong for that one moment, we wouldn't be able to survive. And so some have the custom to say those three words, some don't have the custom to say those three words. So recently, one of my children asked, what's our custom? Apparently, a teacher in his school had mentioned that there are customs both ways, and go home and ask your parents what's their custom. So my child asked, what's our custom? So I said, we do say those three words, even for one brief moment. We include those three words. And he said, Daddy, why? And I said, because I work in a hospital. And I noticed that even for that one moment. And so that's a prayer that we say, multiple times a day. Please God, we should be blessed to say it multiple times a day. But clearly, I have a different approach to it, and it helps guide my work. It helps me understand that this is something precious. We don't take anything for granted. We don't take any part of the body working, functioning the way it should for granted. So that's one prayer that helps guide my work. And very briefly, and I'll pass it right back to you, Mark, and then to Freda. The Moda'ani, the prayer we say first thing in the morning, where we just say, thank you, God, for giving me another day. And I always use the analogy, before my glasses are even on, before I'm oriented to the day, God, thank you for tapping me on the shoulder and saying, I'm giving you another day. And certainly working in a hospital, I reflect on that in a different way. And I also understand that perspective, perhaps, to sometimes, when appropriate, offered to a patient, that today is a gift, today is another opportunity, today there's a blessing of life that you have. And so those are some of the prayers that informed my work and that I developed a different relationship with because of the work that we do. How about you, Mark?
I had a whole thing all prepared and you just basically took it away. So I'm going to cheat and swing the other way. You said it much more eloquently than I would have said it. But I'm going to go back to Buber. As you know, you've seen this sign on the wall in my office. Kind of informs me as to how my day goes. And what he said was, when people come to you for help, do not turn them off with pious words by saying, have faith and take your troubles to God. Act instead as though there were no God, as though there were only one person in the world who could help, only yourself.
So I was thinking about this a lot, and I realized that there is a section of Talmud which I just love, and it comes from Bachot 7a. I'm going to paraphrase it to make it a little bit shorter, but it was taught in a baraita, in a story, that Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha once on Yom Kippur entered the innermost sanctum, the Holy of Holies, to offer incense. And then it goes on in his words. He says, I saw God seated upon a high and exalted throne. And God said to me, Yishmael, my son, bless me. And I said to God, may it be your will that your mercy overcome your anger, because it's a Yom Kippur. And may your mercy prevail over your other attributes. And may you act toward your children with the attribute of mercy. And the Holy One nodded God's head and accepted the blessing. The Gemara goes on to say that this teaches us that you should not take the blessing of an ordinary person lightly. So I'm going to flip it and say, I think this gives us permission and agency that even we, mere mortals, can give blessings to people, and that they can be healing and soothing and connecting. And if we can do so with God, we certainly can do so with our own kind. So I want to thank everyone for participating. I want to thank Simcha and Mark, and I want to thank Ed again for hosting this program generally and for inviting us.
Neshama
And
Cast is a
we wish
production of
everyone a
Neshama,
good day.
Association of Jewish Chaplains. Thank you to Rabbi Freda Cohen, Rabbi Simcha Silverman, and Chaplain Mark Daniels for their engaging discussion. Check our show notes for more information about them. Thank you to Steve Lubetkin and Lubetkin Media Companies for producing this episode. Additional thanks for logistical support to Allison Atterbury, NAJC Executive Director, and the NAJC Social Media Committee. Please consider making a contribution to NAJC to support NeshamahCast and all of the vital work that NAJC does to promote Jewish spiritual care. We're grateful to the anonymous sponsors of this episode and welcome generous gifts to sponsor future episodes. We also welcome sponsorship from institutions where NAJC chaplains work. Please write to me at neshamahcast@gmail.com to discuss a gift or sponsorship opportunity, or click on the link in the show notes to donate. A transcript for this episode is available automatically in the Apple Podcasts app. Our theme music is a nigun for Ki Anu Amecha, written and performed by Reb Cantor Lisa Levine. Please help others find the show by rating and reviewing the show on Apple Podcasts. We welcome comments and suggestions for future programming at neshamahcast@gmail.com. And be sure to follow NAJC on Facebook to learn more about Jewish spiritual care happening in our communities. May we all work together to heal our world.